This meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This meeting complies with the Open Public Meetings Act. Notice of this meeting has been published on the municipal bulletin board and in the applicable news sites.
Roll call, please, Kathleen.
Mr. Hyman.
Here.
Mr. Martins.
Here.
Ms. Rosal.
Here.
Ms. Cusano. Mr. Seleckia.
Here.
Dr. Hofstein.
Here.
Ms. Bradley.
Here. Do we have any resolutions this evening, Ms. Cipriani?
Yes, we do. We have Resolution 2026-10, granting use variance approval on property located at 1435 Toms River Road, Block 23202, Lot 31. This is the wrestling school application that was before us recently.
I need a motion and a second to approve the resolution, please.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Hyman.
Abstain.
Mr. Martins.
Yes.
Ms. Rosal.
Yes.
Ms. Cusano.
Yes.
Mr. Seleckia.
Yes.
Dr. Hofstein.
Yes.
Ms. Bradley.
Yes. Right. I don't believe there's any additional resolutions, but we do have minutes from the April 15th, 2026 meeting. I believe that everyone is available to vote except for Mr. Hyman. So I need a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the 4/15/26 meeting, please.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Martins.
Yes.
Ms. Rosal.
Yes.
Ms. Cusano.
Yes.
Mr. Seleckia.
Yes.
Dr. Hofstein.
Yes.
Ms. Bradley.
Yes. All right, and last but not least, we'd like to get our secretary paid. And first of all, again, I'd like to say thank you to get those minutes done so quickly. That was a lengthy meeting with a lot that happened, so thank you. We have a voucher for this evening's meeting from the Township of Jackson in the amount of $175. I need a motion and a second to pay the voucher, please.
Motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Hyman.
Yes.
Mr. Martins.
Yes.
Ms. Rosal.
Yes.
Mr. Tremor. Oh, sorry. Ms. Cusano.
Yes.
Mr. Seleckia.
Yes.
Dr. Hofstein.
Yes.
Ms. Bradley.
Yes. Right, there's no executive session for this evening. Any announcements, Ms. Cipriani?
No announcements this evening.
All right, then we're going to swear in our professionals at this time.
Please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm that the testimony you will give before this board will be the truth and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Please state your name and position for the record.
Steve Mazer, CME Associates, Artheon, traffic engineer.
Ernie Peters, board planner.
Gina Tumalo, zoning officer.
Okay. Right, I do not believe we have any matters for discussion or administrative approvals. So we're going to move on to applicant number one, our only applicant for this evening, Cardinale and Jackson Crossing. Number two, Adventure Crossing, amended preliminary and final site plan, 776-6, phase 1, C, D, E, and F. Mr. Alfieri.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Salvatore Alfieri, Cleary, Giacobbe, Alfieri, and Jacobs on behalf of the applicant. If I could just take a minute to summarize how we got to where we are tonight, and then we'll be ready to move. We were here in March of last year and presented some testimony by our planner, Mr. Borden. We were here in July of last year where we made arguments, legal arguments relating to the density issue that I assume the board's going to handle tonight. In September, we were here just for the hotel portion of this project, which was approved. And then we were here in November again where our planner and our architect testified. We spent a lot of time in September giving the history of the density also by our planner. So I think tonight our intention is after you tell us how you want to handle the density issues, we're going to bring Mr. Borden up briefly to just orient the board again as to what we're seeking in this application. We have our civil engineer and our traffic engineer. And then at the end of our presentation, whenever that is, we have to bring the planner, Mr. Borden, back up to put proofs on for whatever relief we're going to be required. We have reports that are rather old because we haven't made any resubmissions. So there's really no new reports to discuss. And that's really where we are. So I don't know, Mr. Cipriani, I don't know how you want to handle the density issue first.
Yes, so I certainly am prepared to discuss it, but I'd like for you to make any comments beyond, obviously, the board has your letter from, let's see, July 3rd of 2025. I don't know if you want to make any additional statements.
No, I think we had a very lengthy discussion at that July meeting where we placed on the record our position relating to the density and how this entire project is one tract under the ordinance that you're reviewing this application under, which is an ordinance that was adopted. There were two subsequent ordinances that were adopted that don't apply to this application. So the argument is still the same. I don't know if we need to get into any real detail on that. I'm sure the board members who were either here or listened to the tape. I do want to add, just for the record, that after that July meeting, I did a new hearing notice and I included relief for density so that if the board ultimately ruled that we needed a density variance, we didn't have to renotice. And then the meetings have been carried since then, so there was no new notice required. So no, Mr. Cipriani, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time rehashing what we've already been through.
All right, well, I do have something I'd like to place on the record, just sort of framing the issue before the board discusses it. So just so the board is aware, there's a need for the board to determine the density issue at this point because, and I think Mr. Alfieri just alluded to it, the application is based on the idea that the density is calculated for the entirety of the GDP site and also including phase 2. Mr. Alfieri and I had, as he stated, not only exchanged letters regarding this topic, and I think Mr. Peters had weighed in a little bit on that as well. But I had raised early on that there might be a need for alternate relief in the form of a density variance. The density variance was noticed, but there has not been any testimony or reports regarding that, including from Mr. Peters. So we need to make that determination now before the board can determine the application as a whole. And So just to clarify the issue more formally, it's a question of whether the applicant may rely on the acreage that was originally included in the general development plan, the GDP, was subsequently removed from the development to support in order to support the residential density calculation in the application as it stands, and also whether the density calculation should be limited to the phase 1 acreage, and this application should be looked at independently. So, this project was originally approved as a large-scale GDP, which encompassed approximately 283 acres of mixed-use development. That approval established an overall development framework, including residential density across the entire tract. But since then, because of subsequent litigation and a stipulation of settlement, a portion of the original GDP tied to phase 2, which was lots 5, 6, 19, and 20, were abandoned and removed from the GDP. I said they were abandoned, they were the subject of a separate application, but they were removed from the GDP. The removed parcels were not reinstated into the GDP and are no longer part of, therefore, in my view, but this is for the board to determine of the approved development. The applicant, after the removal of phase 2, obtained an amended GDP approval for a reduced tract comprising fewer lots and less acreage. Since that time, the project has proceeded on a phased basis through a series of approvals tied to discrete portions of the overall property. The current application seeks approval for residential development on a defined tract within the project. Under the governing HCMU zoning standards, and those are the previous standards that are not in the current ordinance, the applicant, as we determined over a year ago, is entitled to the benefit of the older standards under the time of application rule. So under those standards, residential density is limited to 4 units per gross acre, resulting in a maximum permitted yield below what is proposed. But that's really for you to determine whether it's appropriate because you're looking at the entire tract, or if some smaller amount of the tract, either just the application tract or the remaining GDP acreage without phase 2. The applicant's contention is the density should be calculated using the acreage of the entire original GDP, including lands no longer part of the approved development, which would then avoid the need for a density variance. The issues presented are whether the applicant may rely on the acreage previously removed from the GDP to support its density calculation and treat the entire historic GDP tract as a single unit for density purposes, and whether the applicant is limited for density purposes to this application, the phase 1 application. The GDP establishes density based on the development in its entirety is approved, meaning the tract that is actually subject to the operative approval. Question is whether once acreage has been removed from that approval, it can be part of the development and can be used to support residential yield. Also, when an applicant seeks approval for a specific phase on a defined parcel, density or should density be calculated based on that parcel, not by retroactively aggregating the previously approved lands. I won't go through the entire history of the Adventure Crossing project that was put forth by Mr. Peters in his letter, and also Mr. Borden provided testimony for the applicant on several occasions regarding the history of this project. For purposes of tonight, know that in 2019, the applicant obtained approval for a GDP for a large-scale mixed-use development encompassing 283 acres. That approval included a residential component integrated with commercial, recreational, and institutional uses, and established a phased development plan extending up to 20 years. The 2019 approvals were challenged, resulting in litigation that altered the project. A stipulation of settlement was reached in October 2019, which required the applicant to abandon development approvals for lots 5, 6, 19, and 20. Those parcels were subsequently removed from the GDP. And as we know, that was eventually sold off and developed into the warehouse section, just to orient people. The removal of those lots reduced the overall tract and altered the configuration of uses and development intensity across the remaining property. Following the settlement, the development proceeded on a reduced tract consisting primarily of lots 1 through 4, decreasing the development area from approximately 283 acres to approximately 210.8 acres. Subsequent applications and approvals will proceed on the basis of that reduced development footprint. After the settlement, the applicant returns to the board with a revised GDP reflecting the reduced tract. The record reflects that this submission was treated as a new approval framework rather than a continuation of the original GDP configuration. During the January 15th, 2020 hearing, the applicant acknowledged that the revised submission constituted a new application and the prior GDP configuration was no longer operative. The applicant also represented at that time that phase 1 had received preliminary and final site plan approval and would proceed independently from the remaining phases. Thereafter, the project proceeded through a series of phase-specific approvals. In 21 and 22, the board granted preliminary and final site plan approvals for discrete portions of the project by Resolution 2021-18, Resolution 2022-12, Resolution 22-24, And as you recall, I don't recall the number, the Phase 3 and 4 application, which was before this board within the last year, also proceeded on a site-specific basis where density was calculated only for that Phase 3 and 4. I want to note for the record that at that time, the applicant asked the board to proceed that way, but the applicant also did preserve its argument for purposes of this application that the correct density calculation involved the entire tract. Each of the approvals I just mentioned was based on specific site plans, defined tract areas, and representations made by the applicant at that time. Those approvals did not reestablish or treat the project as a single undivided tract for zoning purposes, but instead implemented the development through distinct phases and parcels. The present application seeks approval under Phase 1 for a revised mixed-use project, which includes 641 residential apartments. The applicant asserts that the density should be calculated by reference to the acreage of the entire GDP, including the lands that were previously removed or no longer part of this operative approval or application. Under the MLUL, residential density is defined as the permitted number of dwellings per gross acre of land that is the subject of an application for development. That's NJSA 40:55D-4. Likewise, the Jackson Township ordinance provides that a GDT establishes the permitted number of dwelling units and residential units for the development in its entirety, meaning the tract as approved and in effect. In East Hampton Center LLC versus Planning Board of East Hampton, 354 NJ Super 171, Aptiv 2002, the court emphasized that a GDP defines tract boundaries, permitted density, and the allocation of uses for the development, which are all tied directly to the land that forms the basis of the approval. In Centec Homes LLC versus Township Committee of Mansfield, 372 NJ Super 186, Law Division 2004, the court recognized that a GDP is an integrated development plan dependent on the land area supporting it. There, the removals of a substantial portion of the tract materially altered the development and justified termination of the GDP. The court rejected the notion that a developer could maintain the same development assumptions after removing acreage that formed part of the original approval. Here, the original GDP was materially modified by the subsequent settlement, resulting in the removal of multiple lots and a reduced tract. Once those parcels were removed, they ceased to be part of the development in its entirety, and there is no basis to retain density attributable to them. Accordingly, to answer Phase 1, the density, in my opinion, and this is for the board to determine, must be evaluated based on the land remaining within the operative GDP, and more specifically, the tract subject to the current application. Zoning compliance, including density, must be evaluated based on the specific parcel and phase that are the subject of the application. The HCMU zone standards that are applicable to this application impose a density limit of 4 units per gross acre, which must be applied to the land area supporting the proposed residential development. In Route 440 Developers LLC versus Planning Board of Jersey City, 2020 Westlaw 569160, Aptiv decision March 2nd, 2026. The appellate division confirmed that in phase development, each phase must independently satisfy the applicable zoning and planning requirements. The court upheld the denial of an application where a phase failed to meet critical requirements and instead relied on future phases to supply essential elements of the development. The court made clear that a board is not required to approve a phase that is deficient on the assumption that compliance will occur later. That same principle is analogous to the situation here. The applicant could not rely on acreage outside the tract under review or on other phases of the project to justify the density proposed for Phase 1. Each phase must stand on its own and comply with the ordinances applied to the land before the board. Allowing the applicant to aggregate acreage beyond the subject tract would effectively decouple density from the land supporting it, which is a result not authorized by the MLUL. The applicant's position seeks to revive the acreage of the original GDP for purposes of density calculation, notwithstanding the subsequent settlement, amended approvals, and phased implementation of the project, including phases 3 and 4, in which they requested that it be considered only on the basis of that application. Any modification to a GDP must occur through a formal amendment process. In Pagano versus Woolwich Township Joint Land Use Board, 2015, Westlaw 4661524, active August 7th, 2015. The court recognized that such changes must be pursued through an application and approval under the MLUL. A developer cannot redefine the scope of a GDP through argument in a later phase application. Here, there is no indication the removed parcels were reinstated through any formal amendment. The project has instead proceeded through discrete approvals tied to defined parcels. The applicant's reliance on Alfieri Old Bridge Associates does not alter this conclusion. That case addressed whether parcels were legally incorporated into a GDP based on the approved application and governing resolutions, not whether functionally related parcels may be aggregated for zoning purposes. The court ultimately rejected the inclusion of parcels not part of the operative GDP, notwithstanding the relationship to the broader development. Importantly, Alfieri confirms that development rights are tied to the plan as approved and do not extend to configurations that are no longer operative. Whereas here the project has been materially modified, the prior development framework cannot be invoked to support a new application. Applying these principles, the density analysis must be based on the tract that is the subject of the current application. To the extent that the permitted yield is less than the number of units proposed, that proposal would exceed the permitted density and require a D5 density variance. So obviously that was a lot that I had set forth, and I wanted to give the board the benefit of that analysis, including the case law and the citations to the MLUL in considering the application. So previously we had talked about on the density issue, the removal of phase 2. So I think the board should actually consider this in sort of two aspects. One, whether or not the phase 2 lands that were removed from the GDP should be considered as part of the density calculation. And then secondarily, whether the application density calculation should be limited to this particular application, to the acreage involved in phase 1, this particular application. So I would ask that the board first discuss and consider the question of whether or not to include the phase 2 acreage in any calculation of density for this application.
Could I just clarify 2 points before you act? One is that after the GDP was adopted and after phase 2 was pulled out of the GDP, additional land was added to the Adventure Crossing project, the western portion, and the HCMU zone standards that we're living under for this application were adopted. So they were not in place during the GDP. And Ian went through that in a more detailed sequence. But just I wanted the record clear that the GDP in and of itself does not control our interpretation of how your ordinance should be.
Thank you, Mr. Alfieri. I appreciate that.
Is it question time?
Yes, I know it seems like I would never stop talking, but
No.
that moment has arrived.
Okay. So question for Mr. Alfieri, if I could. So in everything you mentioned, 2 things stood out, 2 cases that were very precise, specific, easy to understand that applies here, right? Mentioned Centex Homes versus Township of Mansfield. And then the other case was Route 44 developers and plan. Those, to me, on the way you wrote it, very specifically addresses this issue exactly. So my question to you is, do you have any other case rulings that would contradict these 2?
So I think to distinguish those cases is that, you can't just rely on the GDP for an interpretation. You need to read your ordinance, and it refers to the term tract, and the term tract included the entire tract of land for the Adventure Crossing project, not the warehouse, not phase one, not phases 3 and 4. Our position is the entire tract, and if you interpret it that way, and that's why those cases, I don't think, have any real relevance to that issue, then that's how you have to rule. If you think that tract is defined or should be interpreted differently, then you'll rule accordingly. But we think it's the entire tract, because that was the intent, we believe, of the ordinance when it was adopted.
Okay, got it. So it comes down to the definition of track, and that's why, to me, it seems like those two cases were very prone, applicable
Yeah, I
here.
agree.
But you seem to
Right,
not
I
think
agree
so
that if
because of
this
that.
was only the GDP parcel,
Yeah.
then those cases control, we agree. But that's not what we're here for. We don't believe that has anything to do, because that GDP has no effect. The apartments as proposed weren't in that GDP. The ordinance wasn't in place during that GDP. And that land, a good portion of the land wasn't in place during the GDP. So things have changed drastically.
Okay, thank you.
Trying to get my thoughts in place. When you came before us for phase 1, that's the one with all the townhouses,
3 and 4.
3 and 4. Okay, when you came for stage 3 and 4, why did you consider that as a separate track and not as part of the general
Oh,
development?
we made it clear that night, and then Mr. Cipriani acknowledged tonight. We knew that this battle was going to happen someday, and we did not want to tie up the townhouse project in that argument. So we carved that land out so that there was no question how density would be calculated there. But we put on the record that we just essentially kicked the can down the road and we'll deal with density during this application. So that's the reason why we were upfront from the minute we filed it, that was our intent.
So I guess my question then, Mr. Alfieri, would be, you talked about the difference between the GDP and the definition of what a tract is, but if phase 2 isn't owned by the applicant anymore, how can we consider that?
Because when you look at the HCMU zone, there is a section that talks about a technical subdivision, and it specifically states that an applicant can come in without regard to the bulk standards and subdivide the tract into multiple tracts or multiple parcels for the purposes of refinancing or ownership or selling. It specifically contemplated that these parcels that are part of the whole might be sold and/or financed to construct. So that was, the ordinance says that, not what we say. That's what the ordinance says.
So it can go both ways then. So if, let's say, phase 2 decides they want to build something, they can use the entire track to make a point on their density as well. Is that what I'm saying, like what you're saying?
Yes, well, just to give you an example, if we have a 100-acre parcel, and we decided to put retail in 50 acres and residential in 50 acres, but the ordinance says you can have X number of units for the entirety. Whether we spread them out equally through the 100 acres or we condense them into one section or the other, it shouldn't matter. The issue is how many units per acre. So, which is what we're doing here. We have different sections that were developed with different types of uses, and the residential is more condensed into, in this case, 2 sections, townhouses and apartments. So the answer to your question, yes, we could put the residential in a smaller section of the entire tract, as long as it meets all the other standards of the ordinance, like
Thank you.
setbacks, et cetera. Right.
So you couldn't wait until there was 1 acre left and then come here and say, well, I have to build 1,100 units on 1 acre.
And I read the
Right.
transcript, you asked that exact question.
Thank you.
And I said, technically, if we met all the other standards, the answer would be yes. If we could go up 300 feet and put up a narrow tower, then yeah, we could squeeze them in, but the ordinance doesn't allow that.
Thank you.
Peters, any other comments for us?
And just to follow up, in the technical subdivision section of the ordinance, it allows that subdivision, as I indicated, for the purpose of the application is to create a new lot for the purpose of financing or transfer of ownership within the development. So it was always contemplated that a tract of this size with those multiple uses, that portions are going to be sold off.
Other questions or comments?
I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around, like, so each phase, you wanted it to be looked at separately to get your favor, like, so it's on your side, but now with this one, you want it as a whole because it's in your favor. So it's kind of hard to, like, why couldn't we just do all of them separately? Because that's how you wanted it on the other ones.
Well, there's nothing we did that was to our favor. We complied with the ordinance in every application we filed from the beginning, other than the fact that there was a parking deck that's not a permitted use in the zone. If that parking deck wasn't here, we would have been at the planning board for all this, for the most part. So we've always complied. We didn't do anything to our benefit. All we did was not have this density argument when we wanted to get the townhouses approved. We didn't gain anything. We didn't get additional density. We didn't get any additional variances. We just wanted to make sure that we got the townhouses approved without debating the density issue. But we didn't benefit otherwise. There was no other, we didn't get anything extra by doing it that way.
Cipriani, if they hadn't, if whatever, bear with me here, because I'm trying to get my words together. If whatever they had wanted to develop in one of the other phases didn't have anything to do with density and wouldn't have raised that question, would we be here?
If I
I
understand.
hope I understand. I hope I said that
So if I understood the question directly or correctly, the other applications, to the best of my knowledge, and maybe Mr. Peters, who has a longer history of this, can correct me if I'm mistaken, the other applications did not involve this issue because I do not believe there has been any application on any of the phases or, and any time that it came back, which required this analysis. Those applications, as I understand it, the density issue, there was not, prior to this application, an application on any of the phases which required an analysis of the overall tract because the density in those prior approvals was within the standards for the tract that was the subject of those applications.
There was really no residential to speak of that there was residential, but we never approached this kind of number to where we wanted to get the full four units per acre calculation. So yes, Mr. Peters is ready to add something.
I just, in answer to your question, pages 3 to 5 of our report go through the application history and which particular board they were at and what they applied for. And so while it's not short reading, it does go through in some detail what board they were at, what they were asking for, and what they received. And then at the end of our report on page 25, under variances and waivers, we list what we believe to be the variance and waiver relief that's necessary for the applications before you this evening, accepting out the Phase 1D hotel that we took care of last December. So to the extent that they've applied for something that's not permitted in the zone, on the parcel of land that they're asking for the parking deck to be on, even though they have a use variance somewhere else to have a parking deck, they still require, for this application, a use variance. So I don't know that the applicant or the applicant's attorney or our attorney has questioned that the jurisdiction of this application this evening is squarely here at the zoning board and not at the planning board. Then we get into the subsequent, if in fact we find that the density issue relates to the property that's left, not the original tract boundary, they need a D5 density variance, which also can only be granted by this board and not the planning board. But again, as we go through these, if we need to spend more time on them, I'm sure between myself and Mr. Borden, we can go through the history of what's gone on so that you're comfortable understanding this application is correctly before our board this evening because they still need, under the land use law, a use variance for the parking deck. Mr. Alfieri, please correct me if I
Oh, 100.
misspoke or wasn't clear.
No issue with density. And if the board members, the September 3rd hearing, which we provided a transcript of, we went through all of these arguments already. So if you needed time to refresh, that would be the one to read.
So the question goes back to that what Mr. Alfieri has correctly identified as the question of what is the tract. So is the tract that is considered for the density, is it the tract that was considered and part of at the time of the adoption of the HCMU, the adoption of the GDP, since at this point, is it, and Mr. Alfieri, correct me if I'm oversimplifying or not saying, I think Mr. Alfieri's point or argument is that the tract was frozen in time at the point of the adoption of the ordinance.
Correct.
And that whatever was within the tract at the time of the adoption of the ordinance remains the tract that you need to consider. My position is that it, was whatever was in at that time, it was then, through the removal of that phase 2 from the GDP, subsequent approvals for that the tract has limited. But that is certainly, an argument. It's not 100%, there's not something directly on point regarding this issue of whether the tract is frozen in time, and then no matter sort of what happens, whether it's sold off, whether it's removed from the GDP, that's still part of the tract because it was part of the tract at the date of the adoption of the ordinance. I think that, in my view, that the principles of the MLUL in terms of considering something as an integrated project come into conflict with that reading that it was frozen in time and that nothing that occurs, including the removal from the GDP, the selling off, the independent applications, the fact that this issue has not come up before doesn't mean that those other applications were not considered. And I think there have been times when the applicant's been before this board and has articulated, that, in looking at other aspects of the project, sometimes it's okay, sometimes it's not okay. Things that have been removed and moved within the project to a substantial degree. But that's really the consideration for the board. Certainly, phase 2 was part of the tract or the overall acreage at the time of the adoption of the ordinance. So the question is whether the subsequent events, the litigation, the removal from the GDP, the selling off for a different project, and the individual applications that have been before this board in the meantime have changed that.
And just, you asked the question, I answered it as a yes or no, but there's more to it. There's never a yes or no. So yes, the ordinance fixed in time what we consider this tract to be. If we developed each section independent of the other, meaning it had separate driveways, separate stormwater management, separate signage, separate everything, I think the town's position is stronger. But in this case, This site was developed as a unified site. There's common access points.
So true, so true.
For example, the Phase 2 warehouse can't get to the warehouse site without going through Phase 1 or Phase 3 and 4, because there's only 2 access points. Stormwater management has shared portions. The signage is shared. Water and sewer utilities are shared. So it's been developed as a single tract with multiple uses and now multiple owners, with 2 separate owners. So I think that's why we say it's fixed in time, because this was a comprehensive development with multiple types of uses.
I do disagree that in the totality of the circumstances, that it's not appropriate to consider it. Certainly, the factors that Mr. Alfieri has raised absolutely have relevance that in terms of the integration of the site, but these are also choices that were made. Some of them were made in response to the litigation that was regarding Phase 2. And so if you consider the tract as a whole and sort of frozen in time in that regard, that doesn't, the counterbalancing argument is that, that the way that that was developed was not contemplated at the time of the original approvals, that there have been a series of approvals, and that to just sort of focus on that word tract doesn't take into account the way in which the approval process has gone forward, the way in which the GDP was developed, and not, with the removal of the parcels, which is also something that has that idea of a unified plan. Though there are unified elements, each application has come forward to some extent. This idea of the shared road system is not intrinsically different than applications that come before the board where the road system is based on a cross-access agreement. There have been an application within the last year before the board, which is where the entire application is dependent on a road that has yet to be constructed by another developer, and then dedicated to the public. So these are things to be considered, and the board absolutely should consider them. I don't consider them to be dispositive. I think that they are part of what needs to be considered, but that also needs to be considered the history of the project. And I don't think the GDP is irrelevant, and I don't think the removal, because the GDP is also that planned development, unified development plan, and then the removal from that does remove that aspect from the tract under consideration.
Well, the original density on the 283 acres would have given you the 1,100 plus home, 1,132 homes. If you remove that, just that Phase 2 lots to whatever it was, where the warehouse is, you said you would be left with 210. So even if you put both tracks together, just on that lot, you would have been entitled to 840. And then subtracting the 500 some-odd from that, you're down to 300 is what you would be allowed if each track is considered separately. Is that where you're getting your 300 number from?
Yes.
You're using a
yes.
600 number and a 300 number, and the discrepancy is.
If we backed out those
right.
lands and did the acreage calculation, yes. Which we don't think is correct.
In my mind, if you're
but yes.
splitting off phases with the townhouses on, created the density in this one area. You said you knowingly created the density because you knew what density you could use there without a problem.
I'm not sure I
So basically,
get
well,
the point.
On phase, I'm getting them mixed up already.
Phases 3 and 4 of the
3 and 4,
townhouses.
that's where the townhouses,
Correct.
where the townhouses are?
Yes.
Okay. Where the townhouses are, we're able to build a little over 500 units, 505 or whatever it was. Okay, so you knew you were going to be left with asking for the other 300 on the last section, the last tract that you had, when you're really entitled to build a little over 300. I don't know what the exact measurements are of the acreage.
I'm not sure I understand you,
Well,
if that's a question.
if you could put on each track what you were permitted to put on the track, if the track you're talking about now, how many acres are there?
I'm going to have to defer to Mr. Borden. You're talking about just for phase 1, the section that's phase 1? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
I'm not sure if we know. I don't know that answer. So.
Well,
I'm
that
sure we
would tell
can
you
get
how
it.
many homes you're allowed to build if that was considered a separate tract.
Well, that's a different story. I think if you rule, I don't think you should analyze this issue to figuring out how many units we're going to get, because that's not the test, how many we're going to get. The issue is which land do you count? And then whatever you determine, then we can figure out how many units we can get. So whether we can get 1 more unit or 2,000 more units is really not relevant. What's relevant is what's the land area we use to calculate how many units we can get.
Went through that, so you just said you could have built 1,100 homes in one big apartment building.
Yeah.
On one tract.
Right.
Piggyback on that. So if, let's say you have a space where you can put 100 homes and you decide to put that 100 homes in one little section, does that mean you're not allowed to build on the other ones because you already have the 100 homes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We're not allowed to build other
So that-
homes. Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm just, so, okay,
Yes.
so that means if you already exceeded all the homes that you needed to build on that entire tract, no one can build anywhere else that's an empty lot within that area.
That's correct. Without getting a density variance.
Got
Correct.
it.
Right, so the question is, right now, whether it's for the density calculation, is the tract to be considered the tract as it was at the time of the adoption of the ordinance, which would be 283 acres? Or is the tract with the phase 2 acreage removed, and that would leave 210.8 acres?
Okay, I'll just make a comment, and then a short question. So I think I'm ready to vote when time comes. I'm ready to vote. Just one very short question. Hopefully it's a yes or no. This is a phased development, correct? You agree with your proposal here? This is a phased development.
And yes, because a tract of this size never gets developed in one phase, multiple phases. But yes, multiple phases.
Okay. So that's why I wanted to get that straight. Because again, simply 2 cases that case law that you brought up here that to me are very straightforward. That one with Route 44 developers, right? Simply says a phase development. Each phase must independently satisfy the applicable zoning and planning requirements. Each individual phase. That's very clear to me that we look at each individual phase. That one. And then that other case that I mentioned, Syntax, right? Where simply said, the court rejected the notion that a developer could maintain the same development assumptions after removing acreage. That's very clear. You can't do that. If you remove the acreage, then you have to recalculate. So those 2, to me, are very clear. I know there's a dispute about, and you guys, I guess, figure it out somewhere. But for me, it's very clear, and that's how I'm going to vote, that we should follow those rules. Anyway, okay, thank you.
So if we remove the acreage, that means they require a density variance. Got it.
Correct. Yes, then they would either need to recalculate the density based on the reduced acres of 210.8 acres, or they would have to apply for a density variance. And I did say they have noticed for a density variance in the past, but we have not had the reports and testimony on that variance, which is why we're considering this exciting question right now.
I guess my comments kind of mirror Mr. Martin's, because I read both letters and the cases that were presented. I just think it's very clear that we should be removing the land, because everything got changed drastically. Just the way I see it, it's, the fact you started with a GDP, now the GDP doesn't exist anymore, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So we're kind of going at it from all different angles here. So to me, it's very clear with these two cases where we should be headed as a board.
Did you just say that you agree that there's no GDP applying to this application?
Yeah, no longer, yeah. It's substantially changed. The GDP that was approved, whenever that was, is nowhere near what the development has been accomplished to date, nor what's being proposed now.
Correct. I mean,
And the ordinance came after, so the newest, all the development was designed off of the new HCMU zone, not because of the GDP, because of the new zone. New being whatever year that was, many years.
correct, but generally a GDP is you want to call it the master plan of a development. So you're totally disregarding your master plan, building something totally different. You've removed certain specific integral parts of this application. There are many, many changes that have happened since then. So you're saying is everything, there's no GDP applying to this at all?
Correct.
And just the tract?
It's just the ordinance, the HCMU zone ordinance that we've been working under since we started the approval process, not the GDP process, but the site plan approval process.
Thank you.
So you just need clarity if you had to, was a motion made or not? Just
No.
No.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I thought you were going to ask a
No,
question.
I
Oh, you just
clarity
wanted
on
to ask,
the motion
okay.
if one was made.
Ms. Cipriano, help me out here. Under the GDP, would assume anywhere, but especially on the record, but under the GDP, following your line of question, Mr. Hyman, under a GDP, we would expect phases. It's a huge project, all these acres, we would expect phases. In that case, I may be able to look at that case differently. However, since there's no GDP still in place, I'm seeing them as individual. Yes, they have the same owner. The applicant is the same for the application, each of the applications, but technically you've got individual projects now.
I would agree. And not only that, but on the prior applications or phases, we've said certain things and they said, no, we're focusing only on this right now, not looking at the whole picture. So the applicant, in my mind, specifically took each phase and divided it from the next. Then now they're coming to us, oh, 1 second, we want to put them all back together and use the density for this.
Right, well, and, but Mr. Alfieri's argument is that the GDP stopped being relevant and when the HCMU ordinance was passed. That certainly in January of 2020, the GDP was still being part of the applications. And the HCMU ordinance was passed in February of 2020. So the HCMU ordinance does not refer, it doesn't by its terms invalidate the GDP. And that was obviously part of the litigation in that one of the settlement's terms was the removal of that phase from the GDP. So the GDP continued to exist. the applicant's argument, as I understand it, it may have existed, but it was not relevant to any applications because they were simply applying under the HCMU zone. So, all over the place. The HCMU zone has been amended several times, was amended in 2023, and again in 2025, but that amendment is not relevant to this application. So it was amended in 2023. The language of that ordinance just establishes an HCMU zoning district. The applicant's position, as I take it, that because the borders of the HCMU district, or I guess this is a question, Mr. Alfieri, are the borders of the HCMU district contiguous with your claimed tract, this applicant's tract?
Yeah, the HCMU zone is just this property. This property meaning the Adventure Crossing, right? It doesn't carry over to any other properties in the town. It was designed simply for this project.
All right, and based on the fact that the zone is contiguous with this property and it only applies to this property, that's sort of the basis, and again, correct me, Mr. Alfieri, that of the claim that that's the tract. So the language of the ordinance does not refer to, it has tract requirements, right? It has requirements for different things. It talks about things within the zone. And so the fact that the zone is all this tract, which at the time that it was adopted, certainly included the Phase 2 lands, that's where Mr. Alfieri's argument is, well, it's basically, it was a zone for our property. And, well, I don't want to place it further away, but it was a zone that covered only this property. Therefore, everything in this property is part of the tract.
That's one of our arguments, yes.
Yes. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I was not trying to limit you on that. But the language of the ordinance itself simply refers to the fact that this is a zone. It includes those areas generally located in the south side of County Route 537 between the Interstate 194 corridor and the Hurricane Harbor Water Park. And then it has a set of different standards for and requirements for within the zone, including height requirements, et cetera, that were referred to earlier. So it doesn't require, by the language of the ordinance, that all applications be made by one property owner. But it does indicate that, so if you had an individual property owner, then, by Mr. Alfieri's reasoning, any applicant that owned land in this zone could come in and take and have the advantage of looking at the entire zoning area, which I don't agree with.
Yeah, and I didn't say that either. I agree with, I agree that if you did that narrow interpretation, you're right, but that's not what we have here. But so yes.
So then, again, as we've said, the question is for the board to determine on what constitutes the tract. Does the tract constitute all of the land within the HCMU zone? Or is it relevant to look at the Unified Development Plan? And is it appropriate to then consider removed the Phase 2 acreage which is not currently part of that unified development plan.
I think I can speak for everybody. If not, please correct me. I think part of the struggle here is, as Mr. Hyman pointed out earlier, on other applications, it's just consider this, not this. So how do we now say, okay, take your blinders off, don't look at these individual pieces, don't look at part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, look at the whole thing. And that becomes the struggle because we were asked to treat it one way on one phase, 3 and 4, and we're being asked to look at the whole picture. Am I making sense here?
Yes,
Yes.
but I think
Right?
that part of what you need to look at is that for the other, let's put three, the recent application for 3 and 4 over to the side for a second. If you look at all of the other applications that have come under the HCMU zone that have come to you, none of them required you to look for these purposes at the other parts of the site. You have considered other parts of the site in terms of looking at traffic flows and traffic density. I don't want to use the word density there, but I can't think of the right word. Whether there would be lots of cars. So this question was not raised by the prior application because it is density and density alone that says you have to look at the overall density of the tract. On the 3 and 4 application, to take it off the shelf, the applicant chose to tailor that application so that the number of units fit within the acreage of just phases 3 and 4. And Mr. Alfieri said that they made that decision. They wanted that townhouse development to move. They didn't want that to be caught up in this density argument, which they knew was coming because it had previously been discussed on the record. Of Mr. Alfieri and I had discussed it. So they knew that there was an issue out there regarding the density calculation. In order to make 3 and 4 move quickly, they avoided that issue by saying, we are not claiming any entitlement to density outside the 3 and 4 acreage on that application. But they did say on the record that they were not waiving the right that they assert to calculate density based on the entire HCMU zone. And I'm using that just to try and create clarity in what which they define as the entire tract.
So if it was included, the entire tract on phase 3 and 4, they could have built more homes?
Yes, if they had made their application for 3 and 4, assuming satisfaction of bulk standards or variances of those for those standards, then they could have put higher density in 3 and 4. But then we would have been in this argument now of once you get outside the acreage of the parcel that is the application that is currently before the board, what gives you an entitlement to that higher density? And in calculating that higher density, what is the overall tract that you are looking at? So it's been a lot of discussion, and obviously there may be more questions and more people who want to weigh in on this topic, but essentially it does boil down to that question of what is the tract to be considered? Is it the entirety of the HCMU zone, or are we still relying on the fact that there was a unified development plan, the GDP, and that there was a removal of the phase 2 acreage from that GDP, along with, again, the things that we've talked about, that being sold off, being developed differently from the GDP plan, and the individual applications that have come forward. There's also, as Mr. Martins had alluded to, the cases that I had cited, and that certainly is a concept in the municipal land use law, that you consider the application that is before you, and you get to consider those lands. In this case, there's also the issues that Mr. Alfieri has raised regarding commonality of road usage, and I think the utilities and sewer. I may be forgetting something he said.
Well, can I ask a question? Maybe you guys can tell me. So the HCMU?
Yes.
Okay. That ordinance was designed specifically for this property, correct?
Yes.
And that was designed because of the GDP that was originally planned?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure that was considered, but that wasn't the
So
only.
had you presented the GDP plan to
I don't, you mean?
council before they created this ordinance?
Well, the GDP had already been adopted
before.
prior to this ordinance.
I understand that, but my question is, was the ordinance a reaction to what was on the GDP to give them, because there was nothing zoned this before. So how did you get you couldn't get this plan that you had until this ordinance was created, correct?
Correct.
So it had to be a reaction from
I-
the other one.
You certainly there was a GDP that was a public record at the time that the governing body adopted the ordinance. I will say that Mr. Alfieri is not in a position to speak for the mindset of the governing body in
No,
2020.
I'm just, in my mind, I'm just trying to go down the steps as how all of this was created, because this zone is it's the only zone in Jackson is this piece of property. So it had to be created as a result of some development plan that was.
If Mr. Borden can explain that part, he was more involved in how the ordinance was created. I really wasn't. If you want to hear that, if you think that's important, we can certainly tell
I
you.
just want to, I'm just trying to go down the steps here, because to me, if it was, then all of a sudden the GDP disappears. So it's kind of, are we starting from scratch, or, it's.
Well, the GDP did not disappear. It had still been adopted. It still was a plan that had been set forth and approved by the board for the development of this property.
Agreed.
Mr. Alfieri's position is that it was no longer relevant once the zone was adopted, but certainly still existed in the universe.
And I guess where I'm trying to get at is, if it's, whether it existed or not, however you want to classify it, these cases talk about changes to a GDP. So if it's still in effect, then this case to me is spot on. That's why I'm just I want to try and understand the steps as to, how we ended up where we started with a GDP. Now we have an ordinance, and now the GDP, we're really not following it anymore. Kind of just, in my brain, I'm just trying to go around.
Well, the applicant has not amended the GDP
Right.
because of the position of the applicant that the GDP was no longer relevant to the development of the site once the ordinance was put in place. But the GDP had been adopted by the board, but that is a position that the applicant has taken.
If the GDP was nullified, if you want to call it, based off of the ordinance, then why wasn't a new GDP, you want to call it, proposed or required for this development?
Well, I can answer that. So a GDP is not required ever. If the reason a GDP is applied for is because if a project is very large and you want to have protections for 20 years from zone changes, then you come and you get that master plan GDP approved, and then you have 20 years to develop it and get separate site plan approvals. The applicant didn't feel the need at that point, after this ordinance was adopted, to go and do a GDP, you went right into site plan. So there was no, we just skipped that step. That's not something that's ever required. It's actually very rare that you go for a GDP approval.
That prior to the adoption of the ordinance, in order to create a unified development plan, at some point a GDP was applied for to present that plan as in its totality for the entire area. And so that was adopted by the board and approved by the board as the overall sort of roadmap for the development of this area. The applicant's position is that once the ordinance was in place, that the ordinance provided that the only relevant roadmap and standards, and that the GDP no longer was provided that roadmap.
When did you say the HCMU zone came into existence?
It was adopted on February 11th, 2020.
I remember when this first started, back in 2017, I think it was. And of course, this was a fantastic application when we first saw it. And I don't recall anybody even mentioning GDP. It was just a mixed-use large sports complex that was being developed. And everything was passed fairly quickly on that.
So Mr. Borden can answer that.
That's your,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Mr. Borden can answer that, respond to that if you give him a minute. And he was sworn in and qualified at earlier meetings, Mr. Borden.
He was, but let's do it again. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give before this board will be the truth and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And Mr. Warden, certainly your qualifications not to step on the chair's line have been accepted by the board previously, but if you could just say your position for the record.
Yes, sir. Ian Borden, President of Professional Design Services, Lakewood, New Jersey. Professional planner in the state of New Jersey. Been practicing for 40 years and president of PDS for 30 and been in front of this board for more than 30 years.
or this board accepts your credentials. Thank you.
And Mr. Warden, I can't speak for the board, but for myself, I ask once again that you speak loudly and clearly and hold the microphone up to your
Yes.
mouth. Thank you.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to address the history of the zone, but in my opinion, that is extremely relevant because that is the basis of the argument, as Mr. Alfieri stated. Understand that in the beginning, and I'm talking before this applicant was involved with these properties at all, and they were simply undeveloped or partially developed with old uses, but undeveloped properties. All of these properties were in the highway commercial zone. Obviously, the township has a lot of highway commercial zone. It runs down not just Monmouth Road, but it runs down County Line Road. Importantly, in the 2009 master plan, which was the large master plan before the 25, the 2009 master plan had a very distinct paragraph that said the crown jewel of the highway commercial zone in Jackson is the properties between Six Flags and 195. Understanding a major objective of the 2009 master plan was to encourage commercial development. It's one thing Jackson has always lacked. Jackson doesn't have a state highway like Howell with Route 9 or Toms River with Route 37, and it's very difficult to do highway development projects on county roads. So that was in the 2009 master plan. These properties, however, were owned by different persons. 3 different entities owned what is now called the 286-acre tract, as we call it. My client, Mr. Cardinale, put together the GDP. We got a GDP approved in 2000, I believe it was 17. The GDP, it's important to remember, the GDP was artificially modified by outside forces, not the town and not the applicant. And what I mean is, and it's in Mr. Peters' summary, an initial GDP was approved for all 286 acres. Residents along Anderson Road appealed that GDP, and the settlement that arose out of that said you have to reduce the size of the GDP. So the GDP was reduced in area and amended and approved. It was at that point in time that the township said, we don't want our objectives of this master plan that's been in place now for more than 10 years to be artificially modified because of a couple of residents that were unhappy. We care about the residents and we want to protect them, but that's not proper planning. So that's why they wrote the HCMU zone. And the HCMU zone was particularly written to only apply, as Ms. Cipriani read, to these properties, the areas south of Monmouth Road between Hurricane Harbor and 195. And furthermore, and this is where the tract is so important, the ordinance was written in a fashion that these properties couldn't individually use the benefits of the HCMU zone. The HCMU zone is an overlay. The highway commercial is still there, but it's an overlay zone. But the overlay zone only applies if the tract works together. In other words, the individual, I mentioned there was 3 property owners. Each of those 3 property owners couldn't run out and say, hey, I'm going to build 4 units per acre because they didn't meet the tract area. It was purposely written so that none of the 3 could do it on them by themselves. The whole intent was to do it as a unified development so that they shared, as Mr. Alfieri stated, traffic, water, sewer, stormwater, proper planning, in my opinion. So that's why the tract area is so important, because without the tract area, the underlying uses are not permitted. So that's why the tract area, and the tract area was after the GDP. And the reason it's after the GDP is because the GDP was artificially modified as a result of this litigation from property owners in the town. I hope that clarifies, hope that answers your question. So it's a very unique highway overlay zone to particularly address objectives of the master plan.
Does anyone have the date on which Resolution 2020-09 was adopted?
I don't have all.
Yeah, no,
I need
I'm.
multiple briefcases. But Gina has everything.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so
And as let me just.
wait. Before
I'm
you-
sorry, Mr. Borden, what is the acreage of the entire HCMU zone?
286 acres.
So it's 286 acres, but isn't it that the acreage requirement for the application of the HCMU zone is 70 acres?
Yes.
So
Yeah,
with,
but, I mean, if you continue with reading the ordinance, and this is where the assemblage is required, the lot width and lot frontage is required to be 2,900 feet. That's where the assemblage is required. Because none of these properties that I mentioned, these 3 different owners, none of these 3 different owners together, in fact, not even 2 of them together, had 2,900 feet.
Madam Chair?
That ordinance
That's
was
the
written
front.
particularly to require all 3 to be part of the tract,
That's the frontage.
the frontage and the width.
Here's,
I apologize for cutting in. I just, as we go along, I want to make sure the record's clear for everyone. Mr. Borden had testified that the original
Microphone,
general
Mr.
development plan
Peters.
was sometime in 2017. It was actually in 2019, and the amendment that came through the court was in 2020.
Okay.
And I don't take any offense. I just want the record to be clear because there is a long history with applications almost every year. So the first GDP didn't come about until 2019. The date of the memorialization of Resolution 2020-09 was February 5th, 2020.
thank you.
As it relates to the comment that I didn't take any exception to Mr. Borden's testimony. As someone said before, we can't guess what was in the governing body's mind, but Mr. Borden was the professional for the landowner who petitioned the governing body for this designation. And I can tell you that without a doubt, the intention was always to have the entire frontage of 537 as part of the HCMU zone. So it was always a lot frontage requirement of 2,900 feet. There was never a breakdown of that. So if we're getting technical subdivisions or phases or any of that, as it relates to the creation of the HCMU zone, the bulk requirement always was 2,900 feet of frontage.
Does the removal of the tract 2 acreage affect the frontage?
Does it affect what?
Does it affect the frontage?
Rather,
Mr.
if the
Borden?
applicant answered that question first.
We say it wasn't removed, but. if you're
Right,
saying-
right, but if it were to be removed, it doesn't, tract 2 did not front on 537, did it?
Well, there's no access on 537. There might be a portion that.
Phase 2 fronts on the jug handle to 195. So I would say, yes, it does remove frontage, yes.
And what would be the remaining frontage?
I do not know.
What ordinance did you need Gina to look up?
No, it's all right.
you did
Ernie
it,
found
yeah.
it. Yeah.
It was the-
It was just a memorialization of the GDP.
Oh, sorry.
If we looked at it, of that being removed affected the frontage, how does that affect?
Well, it does, the question is what the remaining frontage is. So the requirements for the operation of the HCMU zoning district are lot area of 70 acres, which clearly that does not come into play. And then a lot width of 2,900 square feet, a lot frontage of 2,900 contiguous square feet, and a lot depth of 1,000 square feet.
Frontage?
No, I'm not sure if Ernie's trying to figure that out or if Ian is.
The board, Mr. Peters, do either of you know, if we were to remove that tract that was sold off, do we know what the remaining frontage is?
Not off the top of my head this second. I can try to review some of the documents we have, but
A lot, I know. The board, do you have it or no?
Yeah. Well,
Is it just the jug handle? Is that where we're at?
Just a procedural question. Will you need to open it up to the public before we vote? Is that-
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
We can't give that answer without.
okay.
Scales. and-
So that question really just has to do with the remainder of the lot and whether that would still continue to fall within the HCMU zone. That is, to some extent, a separate question from whether the lot 2 acreage should be considered as part of the tract for the calculation of density for this application, which is the question before the board right now.
Any additional questions or comments?
I guess if the frontage is less than the settled on, could there be a variance to make it shorter at some time?
Could it be a variance
Yeah.
to make it fit within the lot requirements?
Yes.
Yes, assuming that it was de minimis, which it would almost have to be.
No additional questions? Godfrey, do you want to say anything before we open it to the public?
No, I didn't want to say as much as I did, so.
All right, at this time, we're going to go ahead and open it to the public. Anyone wishing to come forward and make any comments or ask any questions about what you've heard this evening, please do so at this time. Seeing no one come forward, we're going to go ahead and close public session. Board, it's up for us.
Sorry, someone just
Sorry.
came in. I don't know if she wanted to say anything.
We had just, we're going to open it to the public, and you were outside, so I didn't know if you'd wanted to come forward. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and close public session. Board, it's up to us for discussion, and maybe Ms. Cipriani, you could just kind of give us a little quick clarification.
So, all right, so the question before the board, and we would need a motion either that the tract to be considered for the density calculation for this application either includes the entirety of the HCMU zone, or that the phase 2 acreage should be removed from the density calculation. That would again take it from 283 acres down to 210.8 acres. So those are the motions that I can think of. I'm sure somebody can think of another, but those are the basic things that the basic question that we're trying to decide that the board needs to consider is what is the acreage to be included. So the arguments in summary, obviously the board's been here and asked questions as well, is, is the GDP, which was the Unified Development Plan, from which the phase 2 acres were removed, is that relevant to the determination of what the tract is? The applicant's position is that it is not, that the GDP stopped being relevant upon the adoption of the HCMU zone, and that is what applies, and that if that is satisfied, then you look at the tract as being the entirety of that zone. The applicant had also said that the commonality of roadways and utilities and I think it was sewer and water infrastructure also indicates that the tract should be considered as a whole. You've heard Mr. Borden's statement on the development of this tract and the development of the HCMU zone, and that the zone was intended to work all together. We've discussed, obviously, everyone is in agreement that the removal of the tract 2 acreage does not impact the acreage requirement of the HCMU zone. It may or may not have some relevance. We have not been able to hear testimony regarding the frontage and lot width issues, but essentially it comes down to what does the board think is correctly and fairly to be considered in the density calculation. When you think of this tract under the HCMU zone and under the GDP, as it was originally presented and to the board, approved by the board in most recently in 2020, does that continue to include the phase 2 tract, which is no longer part of the GDP, but is certainly still within the HCMU zone?
Okay, so I'll make a motion based on the case laws that we've been presented and all the comments, I'd like to make a motion that we remove track 2 from the density calculation and move forward from there.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second, and just so we're all on the same page, the motion is that we remove the Phase 2 acreage. So the density calculation will therefore be based on 210 acres. I'm sorry, and a D, right, a D5 variance would be needed, correct? We have a motion, so if you vote yes, you're agreeing that the Phase 2 acreage would be removed, and that the calculation would then be based on the 210 acres. Right? Motion, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Hyman,
Yes.
Mr. Martins,
Yes.
Ms. Rosal, Ms. Cusano,
Yes.
Mr. Slekia,
Yes.
Dr. Hofstein,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley.
Yes.
Thanks. We need a quick break. I'm more worried about it. You good? I just wanted to make sure stenographer.
Can we
did-
take it? Can we take 5? Just 5.
We're going to take a 5-minute break. We'll be back. There's something you'd like to tell us?
Well, I'd like Mr. Alfieri to tell us.
So now that the board made that ruling, the applicant would like a little time to consider what to do with the application. I understand that the July 15th agenda is available, so we would like to carry the application to that night. We may submit a revised plan, hopefully that complies with the density, and then we don't have to talk about that anymore here. But, you know, we have to circle back amongst ourselves, but that's what we're considering.
Have an application in there? We have an application.
Thank you. To Ferris Kayam to that date, and then we also put Grand Harmony, or whatever the actual name is, forgive me, to that date, but that was with the understanding that that would probably be moved once we have our official dates for 26, 27.
Correct, because that July date is where we normally reorg.
Right.
So I believe Ms. Jennings put on the record that their intent is, once we vote in and approve the remainder of the meeting dates for the rest of the year, then she was going to request a formal carry to, I guess.
For both
whatever date.
applications?
I don't recall the
Sure.
Tiferes Heim specifically, but I know that she didn't mention about that.
I thought it was just Grand Harmony, correct?
I
That's what-
definitely
that's
recall
what I remember,
100% the Grand Harmony
Okay.
would be pushed back after that 7:15 reorg. I am not quite so sure about the Tiferes Heim.
Well, Mr. Alfieri, what we can do is we can move it to that date with the understanding that that's our reorg meeting, and we do have one. I believe that will be heard that evening, so I'm just for a matter of timing, so you're aware of what's out there.
What's the one that's after that? Oh, you don't know yet.
We don't
because
know
you
yet.
reorg.
It would technically be the first Wednesday in August, but it's not official yet because we don't handle that until reorg.
So let's take July 15th and deal with it at that point.
Okay.
All right, so it'll be moved to July 15th. At this point, no additional notice is required. Obviously, depending on the scope of any amended application, that may or may not change, but we'll discuss that. And so any amended application, including all issues with plans, will be in prior to that meeting?
Oh, certainly, yes. And we'll grant the board an extension of time to act through the end of July, just so we can figure out where we're going.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Alfieri.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Motion to close.
Motion to
Second?
motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.